I'm Sarah Stallone, instructor for Accurate Advantage and also an optics enthusiast. We want to talk today about understanding optics. Many of us are scope owners, we shoot rifles, we have safes full of optics, but I'm wondering how many of us know how to truly optimize our optic to work best for us. A few points we're going to hit today are how scopes work. Next, we're going to talk about some optical elements and then how to optimize that optic for you. And last, we're going to wrap up by answering some questions and some common myths that many of us get trapped in when we're trying to use the optic to its highest potential. Let's get started. The scope main tube and scope body serve two important functions. First, they house the important internal components, the lenses and the erector system, which we'll talk more about in a moment. The main tube also allows the optic to be rigidly mounted to your rifle to allow for consistent accuracy. First, it's important that we are on the same page as far as terms. Let's talk about some parts and pieces. Optics have an eyepiece, a main tube, an objective lens, adjustment for windage and elevation. Some have a side focus or a parallax focus, and many also have a magnification dial. With those pieces and parts in mind, let's talk about how they work. So think of the main tube as the outside circle and your erector system, the internals, as the inside circle. Some of you have experienced in the past a phenomenon where your elevation or your windage adjustment has been maxed. You no longer receive any movement out of your elevation or windage adjustment. It could be possible that the inside tube that is your erector system has been moved against the inside wall of the main tube. For that reason, you lose both windage and elevation adjustment. Some out there have experienced a scope not working in this manner. I wonder if you could have maxed the adjustment within the main tube. Keep this in mind as we move forward. Next, we'll talk about some elements that help you increase the performance of your optic. First, we were talking about the outside main tube as it relates to the inside erector system, a tube inside of a tube essentially. When your scope ships from the factory, the internals are exactly centered within your main tube. That allows the most strength, the most distance from the sidewalls, but it also allows the most adjustment. So for you long-range shooters, you realize that adjustment is key. You need as much travel as possible. When we get a hold of these scopes, we introduce them to different rifles, we sight in different loads, and pretty soon those internals could be anywhere within the main tube. Now, some of you from the past will remember counting clicks until the internals of your scope bottomed out or your adjustment stopped moving. Then you would count clicks all the way to the other sidewall. Taking that by half, you would then readjust your optic to what you guessed to be the middle. The click and counting method takes a very long time. So let me teach you a quick way to center the internals of your scope. It's called Optical Zero. I have here a mirror. Any mirror will work. I'm asking you to place your optic on its lowest power setting. Next, you'll place the objective lens against the mirror directly. When you look through the scope, you may see two differing crosshairs. Most of you will have made some adjustments on this scope, and two crosshairs will be visible. With your windage and elevation turrets, adjust the reticle from two visible reticles into one. When two crosshairs become one, that means that the internal erector system of your scope is back in the exact center. This process can be done on a scope that's already mounted on a rifle, placing a mirror against the objective lens, placing the scope on its lower power setting. Looking through your eyepiece, you should be able to see the same thing we just did here with an unmounted scope. The mirror and the two crosshairs becoming one will allow you to center your reticle, will center the internals of that scope. Optical Zero can be performed with a scope that's already mounted on a rifle. The same parameters apply. Placing a mirror against the objective lens, placing the scope on its lower power setting, you can view an already mounted scope and still see the two crosshairs we saw earlier. Moving your adjustments to create one crosshair instead of two will center the erector system, and you're back to factory settings. Optical Zero takes seconds. Why would you not want to mount a scope on a rifle, to move a scope between different rifles, to begin a sight-in session? Why would you not want to start with a scope that's back to its factory settings? Optical Zero has several advantages. One, the scope is back to its factory settings. The internals are centered, giving you the most available travel in any direction. The center is also where those internals are most protected from recoil. If you're sighting in for the first time, a scope at Optical Zero will shorten your sighted time. You'll already be aligned with that target. For those of us that take our rifles to the field, we may, at one point or another, have dropped that rifle. It may have taken a tumble down the mountain. Optical Zero offers you an opportunity to double check the scope's internals. Are they okay after taking that tumble? Where is my reticle in relationship to the main tube after an accident? And lastly, on a technical note, Optical Zero can provide a zero stop, a point of reference. Those of you out there that would like to use this as a feature can optically zero a scope, mount it to your rifle, and fire. The location of your hits will be the location of the scope at its Optical Zero. That's like a zero stop. You can always recover to that point of reference, regardless of what happens to the rifle. If you want more information on that, feel free to contact me for more details. If you're like me and you play musical rifles with your optics, spend a few seconds. Bring each scope back to Optical Zero before it's mounted on that next rifle. You'll save yourself a lot of time. You'll save yourself money. There'll be fewer rounds sent downrange, and your sight-in process will be much more simplified. Let's talk next about focus adjustment. You may have an optic that does not have an adjustable objective, or it didn't come with a side focus or a parallax adjustment. You still have focus options though, in the form of the eyepiece focus. You and I have both experienced, either for ourselves or we viewed someone else at the range, furiously cranking away at their eyepiece, attempting to bring the target or their reticle into focus. It feels like so often the target is clear, but you can barely see your reticle, or the reverse, the reticle is clear, but now I can barely see the target. Unfortunately, furiously adjusting your eyepiece does nothing for the target focus. An eyepiece adjustment is for your eye and the reticle. Eyepiece focus focuses only the reticle. It's best if your optic is set up specifically for your eye, and each one of us may have a slightly different adjustment on our eyepiece. Let me help you set this up. Whether the scope is mounted on a rifle or it's still unmounted, you'll want to focus your reticle by aiming at something blank, a blank wall, a blank piece of paper. Remember that this type of focus is only for your reticle. It's not about the target. With that blank wall or that blank piece of paper in view, you'll begin to adjust the eyepiece focus, and you'll watch the reticle fuzz and clear as you adjust. Now, here's a point. Your eye, my eye, is elastic, and as we begin to adjust the focus, your eye goes into overdrive to try to also assist focus. It's not a good time for your eye to be compensating. So as you're adjusting this eyepiece, we recommend short looks through the scope and then look away. Give your eye a rest. Adjust and look back. Look away. Look back. Short adjustments and short views through that scope. What you're looking for is an instant clarity. After a short rest, when you open your eyes and view that optic, is that reticle crystal clear? That's going to help you optimize the reticle focus for you. Now, funny thing, once the reticle has been focused, you'll find your target is also clearer next time you go to the range. Remember that eyepiece focus adjustment is about your eye and the reticle. Next, let's talk about a scope that does have a side focus or a parallax adjustment. The eyepiece focused only the reticle. So the parallax adjustment now is for focusing the reticle to your target. This is especially helpful for the long-range shooter, those that need clarity at distance. A parallax adjustment is less about numbers and distance and more about your individual focus. Some parallax adjustments are listed in yardage. This one here begins at 75 yards and will parallax adjust to infinity. Others, again, have specific yardage. This one starts at 10 yards and has a parallax adjustment to infinity. These numbers are helpful to get you close to your focus, but it's not specifically for your eye. So remember that a side focus, an adjustable objective, or a parallax focus is truly about your individual focus. Adjust the parallax adjustment until it's clear for you. Don't worry about the numbers. This could be different for every person. Parallax, again, is adjusting the reticle to the target. This is the clarity between the reticle and the target. So use it to your advantage. As you get comfy in your rifle platform, beginning to adjust the parallax will bring that target into focus. Once the focus has been adjusted on your scope, it's important to understand a few more things for comfort and then also for clarity. Every scope is specifically set up to have an eye relief or a clear point where your eye can see a full view of your target. Your goal when looking through a scope is to fill the eyepiece with your target. The black edges you see or the half moon that sometimes crowds one side or the other is an example that your face in relationship to the scope is in difference. Eye relief can be viewed by pulling the scope closer to your face or pushing it farther away from you, and you'll know what I'm talking about. When the eyepiece is filled with your target and the image is clear, that would be the correct eye relief for that scope. Every scope may be a little bit different. As I view my target, I'll begin to bring the scope closer to my face until that point where the entire view is filled with my target. The distance from the scope to my eye then becomes my eye relief. The industry says that 2.5 inches of eye relief is enough for the scope distance from your eye to shoot safely. Anybody that's ever shot a .338 is going to be laughing right now. The more eye relief, the more distance you can create from this optic, the safer you can be, especially for those big Alaskan calibers. Even more than that, the more options you have for placement on your rifle scope. If you're a bench rest shooter and you're also a hunter, you know that quickly grabbing your rifle for that split-second shot forces you to pull your face closer to the rifle than you normally would. When you're on the bench, you often place your head farther away from that rifle just for the comfort of the bench rest position. Extended eye relief allows you more options without getting smacked by that scope when you fire the rifle. Let's recap the 3 points we just talked about to help you optimize your optic to get the most out of it. We talked about Optical Zero, centering the inside erector system in your main tube to give you the most adjustment and also that most strength. Sighting in a rifle is made much more simple when the internals are centered. Next, we talked about eyepiece focus, which focuses the reticle specifically for your eye. Then we talked about the parallax focus, which adjusts the reticle in relationship to the target. We'll talk about this a little more in a minute. An adjustable objective, a side focus, a parallax adjustment all do the same thing, which is help target focus specifically at distance. And then last, we talked about eye relief. The distance the scope can be mounted safely from your face and yet allow you a clear, full picture of your target. Every scope may be different in these different elements, so if you're shopping for a new one, Keep these in mind as you make your purchase. If you already have a scope, go through these 3 points and see if your optic is truly set up to help you the best it can. Next, let's answer some questions and bust some myths that are common to optics. First, we need to understand that optics are limited by 3 factors. On one side, you have magnification. Next is eye relief, and also field of view. Magnified optics are a balance of these 3 factors. If I increase my magnification, that means my eye relief and also my field of view must decrease. For my scout scope shooters out there, eye relief is really important to you. If I increase eye relief, then naturally my magnification will be less, my field of view will be less. The balance of these 3 elements limits what I can do with a magnified optic. Another common question we get is about light transmission. Many of us hear the phrase commonly that this light gathering capability of my scope. Many times you'll hear the concept that a bigger objective lens allows me to view more light. My light gathering capability is increased. Or the other thing you hear is a 30 millimeter main tube. Oh, my scope is so much brighter with a 30 millimeter main tube. What's truly happening is the limits of each pane of glass within this optic. Each pane of glass can only allow a certain percentage of light transfer. In the scope I'm holding here, there are 16 lenses represented. So the brightness of the scope is limited by the percentage of light that can pass through each of these 16 lenses. You will have a difference from the light that enters to the light that you're able to see, just by nature of glass and light transfer. A 50 millimeter objective really has nothing to do with the brightness of a scope. A 30 millimeter main tube has nothing to do with the brightness of the scope. The quality of the glass and the coatings that are on that glass will determine a higher percentage of light that can transfer through that scope. So in the end of it, light and brightness is not related to objective lens or main tube size. But here's the good news. Objective lenses that are larger do allow a broader field of view. I can see more. And for that reason, it appears brighter, more surface area. A 30 millimeter main tube does have an advantage, and that's in travel and adjustment, not so much light transfer. Remember, that's about the glass. But a 30 millimeter main tube's advantage is in the extended travel that your internals have. So light transfer is determined by glass and by coatings, not so much by objective and main tube size. Another common question has to do with parallax. Parallax is just a fancy name for focus, really. Earlier we talked about the eyepiece focus, which clarifies the reticle in relationship to your eye, and a parallax adjustment, which clarifies the reticle in relationship to the target. Parallax is described as the apparent movement of the target in relationship with the reticle when the shooter's head position shifts. A good way to exemplify this is for me to place my thumb in example of the target and my other thumb in example of the reticle. With my thumbs extended, shifting my head appears to make my rear thumb jump, even though it's not moving, right? A lifestyle example of this is if I'm sitting in the passenger seat of a car and the husband's driving, I look at his speedometer, and from my viewpoint, it looks like he might be going 40 miles an hour. But from his point of view, in front of the speedometer, he's only going 35. There's an apparent visual difference based on our difference in viewing the target. Parallax is frustrating. You shooters out here know what I'm talking about when that target appears to jump around. A parallax focus attempts to eliminate that jump. Adjusting the parallax or side focus or adjustable objective on your scope literally is transposing the focal plane of the target with the focal plane of the reticle so that there's no shift when the shooter's head is moved. An unadjusted parallax allows the view to jump around. Adjusting parallax co-witnesses the focal plane of the target with the focal plane of the reticle. There's no shift when the shooter's head is moved. For you long-range shooters out there, this is a very handy focus tool. Distance only exaggerates that movement. So if you might be thinking of a long-range gun, a long-range career, you might look into an optic that has a parallax adjustment on it. For those of you interested in the effects of improper parallax adjustment on your point of impact, it's actually far less than you'd think. Math shows us that at 500 yards, an improperly focused parallax adjustment could create a point of impact shift of only around 2 inches. At 500 yards, it can be tough to tell what aspects affect that point of impact shift the most. Parallax is one of those, but it may not be the most affecting element. We know that a properly focused scope allows you to see the target better, and what you can see better allows you to shoot better. We encourage parallax adjustment, especially for the long-range shooter, but just remember that knowing your focus points will allow you to optimize whatever optic you might own. The last question I want to address involves glass quality based on country of origin. You've heard before that the best glass comes from a specific country, and though that may be true, what's even more true is the fact that an optic manufacturer can set a specification, and therefore all glass manufacturers, regardless of their country of origin, must meet that spec. If a optic company sets a very high standard that limits the countries and the glass manufacturers that are available to actually meet that specification, what that means is that most quality optic companies are required to buy their glass from the same sources. Interesting, isn't it? What differentiates quality, what differentiates good glass, happens to be more about the technology in the glass coating than it does in the actual glass manufacturing or its country of origin. Glass coatings are what determine the percentage of light transfer that passes through the scope. Glass coatings are what determine the clarity of the target downrange. So it's interesting, when you're looking at optic quality, it's less about a country and much more about the technology behind those coatings. Now that you know a little bit more about optics, and especially how to set them up to optimize their performance, we hope this helps you as a shooter to sight in faster, to understand problems if they arise, and then to get the best performance possible out of your optic. We hope you shoot straight, enjoy the shooting sports, and as always, seek training, become the best shooter you can be. We'll see you next time.